My early life began in Mumbai, and I was abandoned on the streets of Mumbai, on the pavement, and rescued by the police. And that was quite, for me, like an extraordinary beginning. And I don't think it was really a beginning that I was never aware of. I was always aware of it. And I think that even today, it's, completely dominated my life. I don't think I ever wake up without thinking about my background and how that's impacted on my everyday life. And that left me with quite a huge amount of losses. Obviously, the obvious ones like the loss of my family, loss of both my biological parents, my brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles, grandparents that I don't have. But I also lost kind of other things. I lost my language, I lost my religion, I lost my culture, and I lost a kind of more visceral sense of myself. So I lost the smells and the tastes of Mumbai, of India. And I think of myself now as Indian. As a child, I was far more confused. So I lost a lot, and I gained an amazing and extraordinary family. I gained 7 brothers and sisters, adopted from all different countries, brought up in a multicultural family, extremely unusual experience, challenging. You couldn't have been adopted in a family like that without it being functional. It was fairly dysfunctional. But I gained 2 very charismatic, powerful, I would say highly articulate, intelligent parents, quite difficult to live up to, but parents who cared deeply about what they were doing, even though they didn't do it very well at all. I gained my health and my life. When I came back from India, I was severely malnutritioned. I had to go and spend some time in the Tropical Medicine Hospital in London. And I was treated for all sorts of disorders and diseases that I had, and I had to be treated for malnutrition. So yeah, I gained my life. And I love this country. I love Wales. I've always loved it, but there have been really, really difficult challenges around racism for me living in this country. In Wales, I've probably been assaulted and physically attacked probably 4 or 5 times, verbally abused about 10 times living in Cardiff, and that's like 20, 30 years of my life. Some of the kind of rawest incidents, I was walking along in Cathays and with my sister, who's African Caribbean, and some children started throwing things out of the top of a bus, a double-decker bus, at us, and shouting things at us, and that was really horrible. And it felt really horrible because they were just children doing this, and that still I can feel that sense of pain, that sense of hurt when that happened. And even though people have actually tried to throw punches at me in the street, that incident was really, really, really difficult. I've reported things to the police 3 times. I've reported incidents of racism to the police, where somebody has been arrested, where I've had to give statements to the police. That was an extremely difficult experience to have to go through, but the police have got far, far better in having a conversation with you about race and talking to you about what would happen during that process. I know that there's quite a lot of pressure on people to report and to be upstanding and not to be bystanders, and I don't think there should be any pressure on anybody. I think you should do what you can do, what you feel able, what you feel strong enough to do, and only do it when you have support of family, friends, or organisations. I trained to be a counsellor about 28 years ago, and for most BAME people in any kind of education system, what usually happens is they're the only BAME person on a course. So I was the only BAME person doing my counselling course. I found that quite difficult. I made a decision that every single essay I wrote would be written from a BAME perspective. So even if I had to write about Freud, or if I wrote about Jung, or if I wrote about behavioural psychology, I wrote it from a BAME perspective. As a consequence of that, I didn't get very good grades. But I really wasn't interested in the grades. I was interested in studying everything that I studied from a BAME perspective. So I was able to embrace as much knowledge as I possibly could around BAME wellbeing and psychology and psychiatry in order to go and I went to work for Bernardo's Multicultural Resource Centre. That was my first job, and it was literally only for 2 hours, where I ran a self-esteem workshop for BAME women in Cardiff. And I absolutely loved it, and most of the women that came along were Asian, Muslim, Hindu women. And then I got my very first job at Bristol, where I worked for the NHS. I worked for 9 general practices in the centre of Bristol, and I was employed under some sort of legislation which meant that they could employ just a BAME counsellor. There were probably 10 white counsellors working for that organisation, and I was employed for 1 day, and I only ever saw BAME clients. And I worked there for 10 or 11 years, and that was an incredible experience. I then went to work in an academic environment. It's very, very different, but that gave me the ability to understand and to do a lot of work with international students. And when I worked at Cardiff University, I did a lot of work with international students and BAME UK students. I did a project called #I2MCardiff, which I'm really proud of, which gave voice to BAME students at Cardiff University. It's a massive exhibition that also took place in the Welsh Assembly. I wrote this book because I couldn't find any books about self-help for BAME people. It is a self-help book. It's a book where people can reflect and explore their identity, explore their personal growth, explore their autonomy, explore their issues around race, explore areas around reporting hate crime. And I think it's been welcomed amazingly. So it's sort of like a huge hug from the world to me, and from white people and from BAME people. The basic things in life I'm incredibly grateful for. So I wasn't brought up in the West entirely. The thought of the children that I left behind in that orphanage that weren't rescued, children that weren't adopted, are always in my mind. And as a very young child, my parents went on to adopt 7 children. And this may sound very peculiar, but my parents would often go to children's homes in this country, because I was transnationally adopted, so I have 3 or 4 brothers and sisters transnationally adopted, and I have brothers and sisters who were adopted in this country. So my parents used to go to children's homes, and some of the children in the children's homes who were about 8 or 9 or 10 would come up to me as an 8 or 9-year-old, 10-year-old, and grab hold of my hand and say, "Oh, will you be my mummy? Will you be my mother?" And so for me, the fact that I was an abandoned child, and the fact that I was around other abandoned children, including my brothers and sisters, it just hasn't left me. And grateful is a strange word, because I don't mean that in the sense of I wake up in the morning and think how lucky and how wonderful and how great it is that I got adopted. I suppose I just constantly feel the presence of poverty, and the presence of poverty in the world, and the presence of social injustice in the world, and also an absence and the lack of attachment to my real family, to my real mother and father and my real brothers and sisters. So that's been an incredibly important journey to me, and a lifelong journey.